Are live now and now.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Rebuild for Better, creating safer public spaces for women and girls. I'm Councillor Esslinger, and over the next hour, we will hear from our esteemed panelists and a chance to hear from you as well. Joining me today is Carrie Houghton McDonald, Director of Business Integration in Edmonton Transit Service, Dr. Lise Gotel, Professor with the Department of Women and Gender Studies at the U of A, Rochelle Ben, CEO of the Institute of the Advancement of Aboriginal Women, and last but not least, Mary Jane James, Executive Director of the Sexual Assault Center of Edmonton. If you'd like to join us in the conversation, you can go online to Twitter, #RebuildForBetter. Towards the end of this presentation, our audience will have an opportunity to ask questions. But if we don't get to all of them in time, we will follow up with each and every one of them. We will ask that each guest does not go over 2 minutes per response to ensure that we have time to hear from everyone. Now, we've learned a lot of valuable lessons from COVID-19, besides making sourdough bread. The pandemic has taught us we each have a part to play in keeping each other safe. Now, by taking simple actions, we can make a huge difference for our community. Just as we've done for COVID-19, it's time to change how we think about our public spaces to increase safety for women and girls, recognizing the continuum of violence against women and girls in private and public settings throughout the different phases of the COVID-19 pandemic. As our economy slowly reopens, we have an opportunity to think about re-engaging with each other in safe and respectful ways and the role each of us has to play in making this happen. As you may know, the city and the culture, multiculturalism, and status of women joined the United Nations or UN Women's Safe Cities Global Initiative to improve the safety of women and girls in public spaces, specifically in Edmonton. Minister Leela Sharon here could not be present today, but sends her good wishes and supports all the work that we do together. Edmonton conducted local research to understand sexual violence in our city, and it focused on 3 priority areas. Number 1, Indigenous women and girls are more vulnerable to sexual violence. Number 2, transportation as sites where sexual violence occurs. And finally, responding to and reporting sexual violence is important. Community groups, Indigenous organizations, academia, corporate partners, and the government came together as the Edmonton Safe City Collaboration Committee. They recommended strategies and actions to make public spaces safer for women and girls in Edmonton. And we invite you to look at the recommendation report at edmonton.ca/SafeCityUN. So today we brought together a few of the committee members who worked on the recommendations to talk about sexual violence and how we can move forward to make public spaces safer for women and girls. Thanks to all of you for taking the time to have this important conversation. We appreciate it's been a busy and challenging time for everyone. So now it's time for our panelists to answer a few questions. Now, we've learned a lot from the COVID-19, and now we want to discuss and make oh, sorry, I missed something up here. Already made a mistake. Now you don't have to. The Edmonton Safe City Collaboration Committee met for 14 months to discuss and make recommendations on how we, as a community, should move forward to address sexual violence in public spaces. And from these recommendations, could you each describe some innovative projects the city or your organization are engaged in that support safer public spaces for women and girls? Now remember, just 2 minutes, and we'll start with Rochelle. Be sure to take your mic on.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. IAW was fortunate to receive some funding from the City of Edmonton and the province of Alberta to initiate a project called Safety in the City. And so through that project, we were able to receive some training from the city on how they audit public spaces. We took that training and then, we kind of massaged it a bit to work a little bit for us, conducted a few audits, and then held some workshops on with some safety tips and skill development ideas. And we also promoted the idea of a new safety app and conducted a survey around taxi safety. So those were the few things that we did as an organization during this time. And I know it's very much aligned with the safety and leadership development programs that we work at IAW already. So we were really fortunate to do that. But I think in that respect, we've done a lot of work to kind of further take what was in the initial reports and try and introduce some initiatives, activities to Indigenous women and young girls in the city of Edmonton. So we're thankful to the province and the city for allowing us to do this at the same time. So that was a few things that we're doing.
Thank you. There's so much to talk about. Let's go over to Mary Jane, and maybe you want to respond with what your organization's done.
There. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be with this esteemed panel, as I believe we've been referenced, to talk about the work that we're doing in our city. SACE's public education program is very robust to begin with. We have lots of support, and as Rochelle referenced, we receive financial support and encouragement from the City of Edmonton to do that. But one of the programs that I think I would like to reference right now is a fairly new one, and I think a really cool one, and it's called the 5-Minute Pren program. And this is a program that is highly interactive sexual violence prevention program that aims to address the high rates of alcohol and drug facilitated sexual assaults in our nightlife industry. And these rates are alarmingly high. For anyone who works in this area would know that. But the staff, but we work with the staff to provide them with best practice information and tools and skills for safely intervening and or identifying predatory or non-consensual behavior. And so we've provided this training free of charge to over 60 bar and nightlife venues across the city, ranging from your neighborhood pub to dance clubs to performing arts festivals, etc. So we've gotten a lot of really positive feedback, but we've also worked very closely with the U of A Sexual Assault Center and the City of Edmonton's Gender-Based Violence Prevention Initiative and other sexual violence advocates to develop a citywide nightlife-focused consent campaign. And so with that, one of the things we did was we created a series of posters with messages of consent and respect. And these posters are in circulation and will continue to be going forward for the foreseeable future. So those are a couple of things that we're doing, but of course we're always trying to be on the front line of these sorts of campaigns and initiatives to address what we all know is a very concerning problem.
Thank you. Maybe Carrie, you would like to jump in and tell us about some of the things that you've been working on.
Thanks so much. We're really excited at the city, particularly with transit and my colleagues at transit, to see the recommendations coming from the work of the committee. We've been focused a lot on safety and security within transit, related to the commitment with the UN Women's Safe City Global Initiative, and have been investing and making changes related to things like adding more security, putting more surveillance cameras, a lot of physical aspects of security. And we're really excited because our next phase of work expands that And what we're focused on is just improving safety and security for women and girls so that it's safe for everybody. And looking at, in particular, a process around gender-based analysis. So evolving this framework we have and really looking at it from a very diverse lens. And what are all of the different needs that ought to be addressed in the next phase of our work? So our enhancements are ongoing. We do a lot of work every year and have been for the past few years. And we're just looking forward to these next phases of working closely with community groups. We just finished up some customer journey mapping. So we actually looked at the journey from the minute, and I was a transit user exclusively for about 10 years. As a woman, I know the challenges, I know the opportunities as well. So looking at that journey from the minute I'm thinking I have to leave my house until I get back home. What did that look like? So we have that as a framework, and we're going to partner with community groups to do a deep dive and looking at it from a safety and security lens using that gender-based analysis tool. So we're pretty excited about that.
Awesome. Well, lots of things are happening. Now let's go to Lise. What would you like to add to this conversation?
Well, really, thank you, Bev, for organizing this, and thanks to everyone for your great work. I'd just like to take a step back and to talk, first of all, about how important this collaboration was, because as we all know, sexual violence is a pervasive problem that can sometimes seem really intractable. And I think we need intergovernmental and cross-sectoral collaboration to really get us to some innovative strategic thinking that is solution-oriented. And I've got to say that that's what happened on this committee. We all sat around this table for a very long time trying to think about this problem from different perspectives and to try and come up with some solutions that could be embraced by our city. Because as we know, we have a big problem in Alberta. Alberta has one of the highest rates of sexual violence in the country, and we need to move forward. I have to say that a lot of the initiatives that have, all of the initiatives that have arisen out of this collaboration have been led by the city, embraced by transit and police. And, you know, as someone who's a researcher and as a policy advocate, I would like to say that I'd like to see the government of Alberta be more engaged in the initiatives that we've embraced, because this is going to involve governments of all levels working together if we're really going to have effective solutions. Because I work on law, though, I'd like to talk about a couple of recommendations from our work that are related to law, which I think are really important. And first of all, I just want to draw attention to how Edmonton Police Service has launched an online reporting tool. We all know that rates of police reporting for sexual violence are abysmally low. Only 5% of survivors make a police report. And we need to facilitate survivors in making reports. So I think the online reporting tool is something that helps to remove barriers, because we know that survivors are fear victim blaming. So online reporting is a great way to bring this really, big problem to the attention of the authorities. And the second thing I wanted to draw attention to is our recommendation for a municipal bylaw against public forms of sexual harassment. Street harassment is a big problem. It inhibits the participation of women and girls in public space, but it exists in a kind of jurisdictional no man's land because it is not a crime. And if you step into a business or into a service, well, those businesses and services are required to have in place effective responses because of human rights law. But on the street or in public parks, there are no obligations. So a bylaw can really help to address this jurisdictional limbo. And we would be innovators in moving forward with this. I don't think there are any other North American jurisdictions who have moved forward with a bylaw on street harassment. So that is an exciting initiative, and I'm really excited to see how that unfolds. So thank you.
Thank you. Some great work and some great advice going forward. And you've all been working very hard on this file as we move forward up until now. But right now we have COVID-19 and our world has changed dramatically. So I'm just curious if you've seen any opportunities that have risen to increase the awareness of sexual violence during this time. And maybe I'll go to Mary Jane to start with.
Right, so COVID-19, or as they say in the Maritimes, where I'm from, and Lee's as well, the virus in their very colloquial language. So, it's facing all of us to really reevaluate the separation between private and public spheres of life. And, we've suddenly found ourselves in a world where for many people, their home has also become, many other things, a school, a restaurant, an entertainment venue, workplace, obviously. So, and with many folks, conducting their affairs from their home and in isolation for the most part, we are forced to think about questions like, what if someone's home isn't safe? And what if being at home and in isolation prohibits them from getting and accessing the resources that they really need? And also, what if they really don't have a home at all? So, there is no doubt, we all know that sexual violence is very prevalent, and it certainly does occur in public spaces much, much more than we would like to see. Statistically, we know that to be a fact. But what I do want to share is that, and as difficult as it is for us to understand, is that 85% of the time, sexual violence occurs between people who know each other. And, this can be people who are living in the same home, family, partners, caregivers, roommates, whatever that might be. So, and on top of that, I suppose there are people, those folks who are experiencing sexual violence are healing from sexual violence. At this time, there are fewer supports and resources for them to access safely. And so this comes at a time when anxiety and triggers and danger are all increasing very rapidly. So, our one line for sexual violence has seen a 57% increase in texts, calls, and chats since the pandemic began. So we know there are a lot of folks out there who are really looking for supports, and we need to all recognize that we all have a role to play in this, because I think for a long time, way too long, sexual violence has been seen as a private matter, and I think that what COVID has done is really breaking down those those artificial boundaries between private and public space, and is instead forcing us to recognize that the responsibility is ours as individuals and as a community, and that we all have a role to play. Thank you.
Wow, that's great. I mean, it's something the whole world is dealing with, but we have work to do. Rochelle, what are you seeing?
And I totally appreciate the words from Mary Jane, because I think that's a new kind of area that is so necessary for us to keep working on. From our perspective, my perspective individually, I think the COVID-19 has really shone a light on how we treat vulnerable communities, and so for us that means good news in that it's creating awareness about some of the situations, as Mary Jane talked about. Is your home safe? Are you in a safe place? Those types of basic things that not all people have. And so my hope is that through the work that we do to address and recover from COVID-19, we take the opportunity to look at those indiscrepancies, and also work on all forms of violence against, in our case, Indigenous women, but all women, because it is the instances that we're seeing are more intense. They're more violent. There's an increase in severity as far as we see, and the time is now. So we've had so many reports and recommendations come out to say we've got to do something. And so I'm hoping that as we recover and respond, that we can implement some new things that has been said before. So that's for me.
Thank you. And, you know, I heard what you're saying, increased in severity. I've heard that as well. And certainly if the time is a not now, when will it be the time? We are poised at this point. And so, Lise, from your perspective, how has the virus affected sexual violence and the awareness of it?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's no doubt that I'll just say at a more general level, COVID is increasing gender inequality. You know, economists are talking about this as being a she-cession because women have been disproportionately affected by job loss and by the loss of working hours. And that's because they're more likely than men to do the kinds of jobs that are more difficult to do virtually. So when we think about it, you know, women are really overrepresented. They're the majority of low-wage essential workers on the front lines of this crisis. They're doing the cleaning, they're doing the caring work, and they're working as cashiers, you know, the 3 C's. And while some of us have the comparative luxury of being able to do our work from home, those women do not. So they're still taking transit to work, they're still walking to work, and while many of us have the comparative luxury of being in private spaces, and even more important being in private spaces that are experienced as being safe, for many women that's not the case. And I think it's really caused us to have to think about that. So I was talking to a young woman, for example, who has had to continue working during the pandemic in a face-to-face way, and she takes the LRT. And, you know, right now our priorities when we get on public transit may be to be as far away as possible from other people in order to keep ourselves safe from COVID. But if we choose a car that is relatively empty, that can also create danger and vulnerability to sexual violence. So we need to think about how this is being experienced by the women who are still out there working during this crisis. But I guess on the more positive note, you know, we on the collaboration committee, we wanted to think of ways that we could contribute to prevention efforts in the city. And of course, you know, the kind of programming that has been proven to be most effective is bystander training. Bystander training, though, is typically delivered in small face-to-face environments. So we really struggled with how we could get the message of bystander training out there to more Edmontonians. And, you know, I think that the initiative that Mary Jane was mentioning, the 5 Minute Friends initiative, is a good way of, you know, of thinking about innovative forms of bystander training. We hadn't really thought about how we might be able to use online environments to spread the message of bystander training. So I think, you know, we've all become more comfortable with and more innovative in our uses of online spaces. And I think this might be a time for us to think about how we can reframe some of our recommendations to take that into account. So the pandemic, I think, is deepening gender inequality, but it's giving us some more innovative mechanisms to try and address that inequality.
Thank you, Lise. And I think it's a great point that we have an opportunity to move this forward and to look at some of those. And I know, Carrie, you've been thinking of how a woman experiences transit, and that's changing your work. So maybe you want to share with us what you're thinking.
Absolutely. And, you know, to touch on what the 3 previous speakers have touched on, there's really 4 things that stand out for me. One, there's a clear call to action, and I think you've all touched on it. It's really about we each play an important role in keeping each other safe. So it's no longer just certain groups of us doing this work. And I think the committee really highlighted how well and integrated and collaborative and how strong we are when we do that and kind of address that call to action. So I'm really excited and hope that momentum keeps going. I think COVID has really highlighted how important that is and given us further opportunities. The second thing for me that stands out, that COVID has kind of shone a bright spotlight on mental health as well as our physical health. So thinking about who is using transit in particular for my lens, and thirdly, how women rely on transit. So I've been talking a lot about it over the last few months. Lots of great research coming out about our unique needs. So, you know, how we travel is different than other groups. What my needs are as a woman, very different than other groups. My safety and security needs are different. So really understanding how women are using transit, how important it is. And I was so happy to hear the federal government acknowledge that transit is an essential service. Because I got to tell you, for a lot of people, that is their only mobility option. They don't have the luxury of having a vehicle or a bicycle that they can use, or, you know, all these other modes. They rely on transit heavily, and we provide that service to them, and it needs to be safe, needs to be reliable, and it needs to be a convenient option for them. And the fourth thing that stands out, and I think Rochelle touched on it, is it's really highlighted how we treat vulnerable people. So our vulnerable Edmontonians during a time of crisis like this, it really opened our eyes to what their needs are and where the gaps are. And I think transit played a role in a simple thing like providing transportation to the expo center. So being able to connect people with those essential supports and resources, a small thing for us to be able to do to help, but an important part of our community response. And I think there's more to do there. There's more to do in terms of affordable housing and in terms of ongoing support to help people when things like this happen, so that we can all come together easily and know how to navigate those steps.
Great. Well, as the economy slowly reopens and we're relaunching, there's an opportunity to re-engage with one another, hopefully in a safe and respectful way. So I'm curious if there's any additional information you have or innovative ways that we can increase safety for women and girls in public places. And this time, I'm going to start with Carrie, now that you've just had a pause there.
Thank you. I think further to my previous point, women use transit a lot, and our needs, you know, relate to everything from using it for childcare, getting our kids to school or to childcare services, education, training, employment, healthcare appointments. It really is how we connect with our communities. So for us, it's about ensuring we understand what those needs are and that we're working together to apply that gender-based analysis to the journey and to coming up with actions that address root causes. So for us, we're really excited about partnering with community groups, doing a lot of consultation and engagement to do that deep dive into what are those root causes of the concerns. So I want to make sure that if someone wants to use transit but doesn't feel comfortable for safety reasons or other, what is behind that and how can I fix it? Again, I use transit exclusively for about 10 years. I know how important it can be. You know, you have to get your groceries. You want to, I don't know, go visit friends. Like transit is the way you do that. So it's all about making those improvements, working with council. Council's been a great supporter of our plans, and ensuring we have a staged approach to implementing targeted actions, again, to get at those root causes so that we encourage as many people as possible who want to use transit to encourage them and tell them that it's a safe, reliable, and convenient transportation option. So that's really our focus.
That's great. Thank you. Mary Jane, are you seeing there might be some innovative ways that you might position your organization moving forward or encourage people?
Yeah, thank you for that. I want to start by saying that we must caution ourselves as a community and as individuals to not sort of create or, influence women and girls by giving them tips or, rules or what you should do and what you shouldn't do, because really what that does is shifts the blame to what the woman or girl or we know men and boys are affected too, but right now we're having the discussion about women and girls. So we're really, really careful at SAYS to never say, you shouldn't walk alone, you should sit in a car all by yourself on the LRT or whatever, because not only does that shift the blame, it also, causes that person to blame themselves for, well, I should have, I could have, I would have, what would have happened. So I wanted to start there, but I also, one of the things that COVID has forced us to recognize is how we deliver our service, and how we really, we spent an awful lot of time recognizing that now our office is closed. What are the barriers that folks are facing to get these services that they need? And so while, offering virtual counseling, which we are doing and doing it very well, maybe, breaks down some barriers for some folks, for other folks, it doesn't, because they may be living with the perpetrator, or they may have, as Lee's alluded to, women are the ones who are typically working from home while their kids are at home. They may not have that space. They may not have an internet. They may not have a laptop. So while it does work and break down some barriers for some people who may have mobility issues or may not have a car or can't get the bus, whatever, we always have to keep the entire demographic in mind, so that it's not a one size fits all. And again, I've given this a lot of thought, and I think that the panel will agree with me that while we've definitely determined that COVID-19 is a public health issue, absolutely, and it's a public matter, we also have a collective responsibility to, flatten the curve, if you will, on sexual violence. So it takes all of us. And I think there's a real opportunity here to look at what was considered normal. And we, as we all say, or we hear people say, when can we get back to normal? When is normal going to happen? And, what we considered normal, or accepted it, as, homelessness, poverty, and the very sad fact that 2 in 3 women and girls will experience sexual violence at some point in their lifetime. Maybe what we should be saying is we don't want things to return to normal. We want a better normal. We want to see things get much, much better, particularly for those marginalized women and girls among us, and to make sure that we're doing our part in keeping each other safe and well.
Thank you. Well, that's why we titled this Rebuild for Better, because I think it's important that we change the discussion. I love that. Let's flatten the curve for sexual violence. I think that's a great way.
You can use that as a coined poster or something, Bev.
Yeah, no, I think that we have to think about that. We don't want a new normal. We want a better normal. And I think it's our opportunity. So, Lisa, I know you've given this some thought. Do you have anything to add on this subject, on opportunities?
Yeah, well, that's great. I like this idea of flattening the curve and a better normal. And what I'd like to say is that I think that we really need to keep in mind how sexual violence and gender inequality are complexly related. And because the pandemic has had gendered effects, and because it's deepening gender inequality, I really think that there's a very urgent need to maintain a gender lens on the recovery phase. We're not going to successfully recover if we don't apply a gender-based analysis to policy, to budgeting. It's not somehow optional. It's not something to wait until the economy recovers, and then we'll have enough resources to then maybe think about addressing sexual violence or gender-based violence or gender inequality. Instead, what we're learning from the pandemic is that if we don't confront these things together, we're not going to have a successful economic recovery. So it's really, really important that all levels of government embrace gender-based analysis and really keep that front and center of their recovery plans.
And I appreciate that. I know at the city, we have GBA Plus embedded in all our recover discussions, because, there is a she session, or we do a she recovery. The whole point is we need to improve life for women and girls. They're the most impacted, and we can't have them outside of this conversation. So, Rochelle, just thinking about some opportunities as we move forward into relaunch, what is your organization thinking of or recommending?
Yeah, and I think the committee did a lot of great work around looking at reporting. How can we make reporting easier? And I know, I'm hopeful that the recommendations will be implemented that the committee came up with, and so for us, as we have done for several years, we've kind of looked at the justice kind of implications of that. So once there is a report made, going through the court system, what is that experience like? And so there's a lot of work to be done. And I mean, ourselves and LEAF have been involved in a couple of cases that, we haven't really seen a lot of movement. So I know there's a lot of work to be done on that end of the spectrum. We'll continue to do that. I've also got a issue regarding taxi safety, and we were fortunate to be able to get Uber to the table and really admire them for doing that, but all the other taxi services were not involved, and that's a place that we are seeing a lot of luring, sexual assault, and also incidents of violence coming from taxi cab drivers. So that's an area that I haven't forgot about and that I continue to kind of push for. So you'll be seeing some work being done at IAW around those couple of issues.
Thank you, and I appreciate the work you mentioned on taxi safety. I was at the UN Safe Cities Global Leadership Forum, and they have countries or cities that have implemented identify which taxis are safe for women. They train the drivers, they have a different standard. And though I like that idea, I'd rather move everybody to that safe place. So I think it's warrants some great conversation. So thank you for raising that. So I think that's really what people are coming out of this thing. And how do we help each other? How do we improve our community? Many have connected with family and friends. And I think that's important to keep us connected. Otherwise, we're just in our own little bubbles. So what could citizens do if they see someone experiencing violence in a public place? And maybe I'll start with Lisa this time.
Sorry, thanks, Bev. Well, I mean, I think we can apply, the insights of bystander training. Bystander training, going back to something that Mary Jane was saying, teaches us that, this is not an individual problem, it's a community problem. We have to be engaged as a community. We have to make ourselves aware of the problem of sexual violence, and we need to learn ways to safely intervene in situations of sexual violence. So what bystander training tells us is that what you do if you see a situation of sexual violence is you, first of all, ask what you can do to interrupt the situation, for example, by creating a distraction. You can speak to the person who appears to be experiencing sexual violence to ask them, what they need. Who did you come here with? Would you like me to stay with you? You can make a report to an authority. So, for example, if you're on the bus, you can report to the bus driver. And you can enlist others around you to help you in this situation. Those are the insights of bystander training, and I think we all need to learn how to apply them effectively in our day-to-day lives.
Great. Carrie, anything you would add to that?
Well, I love what Lee's highlighted. I think, from a transit perspective, we've got a number of measures in place that if someone is in immediate danger, we'd want to make sure that they get the support they need. So we've got our emergency phones that are located in our centers. We've got a strip that can be pulled if you're on an LRT train and witness something. We're really excited to be working on an app. So it was mentioned earlier, or a text alert, I should say, feature. Not sure yet if it's going to be an app or a phone number that you just send a text message to, but to give that discreet way. Again, primarily women might not be comfortable making a phone call, in the moment, especially if you're on a bus and there's a lot of people around you. This would be a very discreet way for you to send a message to our control center, which then dispatches resources depending on the severity of what's happening. So that's the lifeline our operators have when they need extra support. So we'd essentially be allowing us as members of the public who are using transit, the minute we have a concern that we think warrants an escalation and we don't feel safe approaching the operator, we'd be able to discreetly send a text message that would go into our control center. So we're really excited about that. We're working on it right now. Really hopeful that in the fall that can roll out as well. So there's a couple of extra options available, I think, if it's happening within transit.
Thanks. And it's not just women. I think seniors would probably feel the same, but today we're focusing on women and girls. Rochelle, anything that you would suggest if someone saw someone experience violence, what do you recommend?
Yeah, I know the important thing that we've learned, and we have this in our surveys to families, is around, we have to educate the people that women will typically go to. So it may be an auntie, it may be a grandma, or maybe a friend, because we know that oftentimes they won't go to the police. And so I like the idea of bystander training, and I think that's a really great move to go, and just extending that to family members who may be able to act as a conduit to that reporting. So that's kind of where we're at, just to try and see if there's ways that we can increase the safety around reporting and the natural allies that they have already.
Great. So Mary Jane, on that subject, the last word will go to you.
Oh, well, thank you. I don't really have anything more to add than what the others have added. We obviously spoke about the bystander intervention that we provide, but it's very targeted to specific audiences. And I agree with the other panelists that this has got to be delivered on a much broader scale to the community. And it's a pretty easy campaign to do via posters or TV ads, radio ads. You could just flood the waves with this sort of thing. At CEAS, we use, the 4 Ds of bystander information intervention, which is direct, delay, delegate, and distract. And those are things that are easily, packaged and put out there to the public. So I think if there's anything that I would like to see, I think we have to get moving on this particular campaign. It's really important, and without it, I think you're going to have people who may want to be involved and may want to intervene but don't know how, or too scared, and they have a right to be scared. Sometimes these things can escalate into even greater violence, and so we certainly don't want to have everyone going out there and not recognizing the potential danger that might be involved. So campaign would be what I would recommend too.
Well, I think it's so important that we give people the tools to be helpful, right? So we want to make sure that. Now, we're also going to open this up to additional questions. I do have a couple that have come in, and Marlis, I don't know if we have any more.
Hello, yes.
Hi.
Thank you, everyone.
The questions for us. So Marlis, maybe you have a question you'd like to bring up.
You betcha. We heard from the Women's Legal Education and Action Fund in Edmonton, the LEAF branch, a question about transit, and this will be directed to Carrie. Given that women and girls report feeling unsafe and unassisted by ETS when using transit services, and given the positive obligations on ETS under human rights law to provide equal access to service, what specific or concrete steps has ETS taken or will be taken to address or redress this?
Carrie.
Well, that is a great question, and I really appreciate being asked, because we have been doing a lot and we probably haven't spent enough time telling people what we've been doing. So again, appreciate the question. I think the partnership that we've made with the UN Women's Safe Cities work has really been a good push in the direction of doing a deeper dive and looking at this again from the perspective of women. I'm going to say more straightforward solutions like better training for our operators is something that we've implemented starting in 2018. So every single transit operator has received training and will receive training on an annual basis in a number of different areas, including how to handle difficult and dangerous situations, which is national curriculum that is coordinated through our transit association. So that's just one example. We've made a lot of improvements in physical security because we want to make sure that our transit stations and LRT stations as well are safe. So better lighting as an example, so better surveillance. We've put physical security at those stations and LRT areas as well. We apply crime prevention through environmental design. So any infrastructure improvements, we're looking at it from that particular perspective. We do thorough investigations into any complaint that comes in. So we have a full team of people. The minute we're made aware of a situation, we start our process on an investigation. So we work really closely with human resources. It's very structured, and we go through the process and ensure that the complainant is engaged and hopefully feels supported throughout the process. So we want to be transparent about all of the different steps we're taking, because I know it's hard and a lot of times people are not reporting concerns. So if they take the time to do that and express to us their concerns, we want to go through that process and make sure that they understand that we're listening and that we want to get to the bottom of it as well. At the end of that, we determine if corrective action is needed on our end, and then we implement whatever those steps are. In addition to that, the detailed customer journey mapping that I mentioned earlier, we're really excited about. It's going to be an important framework for us to move forward and incorporating that gender-based analysis process. We are leading within the transit industry when it comes to adopting that GBA plus approach. And I'm really thrilled. And I think you have a good example today of the number of different community groups that are doing important work in this area. And I'm just looking forward to being at the table with them to again do that deeper dive and say, what are the root causes of the concerns? How do we actually fix it and address it? Transit in some ways provides the opportunity because we are in so many public spaces, but this is a much broader issue. This is about creating a safer Edmonton for everybody. It's about how do we make sure people respect our public spaces and that women and girls in particular feel safe going about their day-to-day business. That, at the end of the day, is where our focus is, and we're just looking forward to these next steps.
Awesome, thank you. Well, that's a very full answer. Marlis, another question that's come up?
You betcha. This one is for Rochelle, and it's from Vina, who wants to know how does the initiative relate to the incidents of Indigenous missing and murdered women and girls?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know soon it will be 1 year since the national action plan. The final report on the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. The national inquiry came up with recommendations, and so there is a joint committee that's been set up by the province, of which I'm one of the members of. So really excited about moving forward with those recommendations in Alberta. But how it relates is there are instances when Indigenous girls are lured from public spaces, and we say it at social events, like I mentioned earlier with taxi cabs, other types of instances where they are lured, and of course that leads down a very dark path, and sometimes it leads to worse situations. So it's very much a part of the work that needs to be done when we look at the missing and murdered Indigenous girls. And we do have a huge issue, and I mentioned a little bit about we were involved with 3 court cases that went forward that kind of identified recommendations again. So I am hopeful that we can start implementing some of the recommendations, because they're fantastic. If somebody looks at them, and wants to implement them, that'd be great, because there is a lot of work to be done. And so it's very much related.
Awesome. There's so much is happening. Marlis, another question.
You bet. I have a question also from Vina for Mary Jane. Mary Jane, can you talk about how the information about bystander intervention and various assorted supports for women and girls who are experiencing sexual violence. How are those supports getting out to women and girls from various cultures and with language barriers?
Great question. Thank you so much. I think I did reference this before, but I'll reference it again. The majority of sexual violence that's experienced by immigrant women and girls, and all women and girls, in fact, is perpetrated by someone they know. So one of the things that I think we need to focus on is increasing the public's understanding of the rights and laws in Canada. And we need to, create lots of safe spaces and newcomer serving agencies to talk about these things and to build capacity while, I suppose, celebrating resiliency. And, at SACE, we have a very strong and very passionate diversity and inclusion team. So we're constantly working and looking at ways that we can reach these folks and these demographics and communities that may not otherwise be able to access our services because of the various barriers, and sometimes with the certainly language barriers. So we, for instance, have developed booklets for newcomers in specific languages and topic-specific areas related to sexual violence that we distribute to the newcomer serving agencies and are certainly available on demand and through ordering on our website. But we just work really hard every day. We've made it one of our key priorities in our strategic plan for the next 5 years that this is an area that we know needs attention, we know is underserved, we know face many, many barriers. And we want to ensure that they're getting the information that they need in a trauma-informed and trauma-centered way, culturally sensitive. And we can't do it all, but we're certainly working to address. We work with translators from the Family Center to ensure that when someone reaches out to us for services and support, we have a translator available. It's a world that we need to recognize that this is the way that things need to be done, and we're doing our part, I think, in making sure that the services that we provide are available to everyone, regardless of gender, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of culture. We want people to know that we're here.
Well, it seems like we've just scratched the surface of all the things you guys are doing and your knowledge. So really, we have time for one question, Marla. So let's take it out.
This is a question for Lise. What is being done to address the issues surrounding training for law enforcement to be more informed and empathetic and understanding regarding the cycle of domestic violence?
Right. Well, I have to say that, first of all, EPS was one of our partners on the collaboration committee. And so they worked really, really collaboratively with us to think about how to improve police responses to sexual violence particularly. I mean, domestic violence was really out of scope of the work of the collaboration committee, even though we know that domestic violence and sexual violence are intimately related. The city has applied for an anti-racism action grant to obtain funds from the federal government in order to implement a 2-year project to improve training for law enforcement in order to improve racism and discrimination specifically. I know that Mary Jane and SACE have been working with EPS to work on police training in response to sexual violence. And last year, EPS reached out to me to see if I would be able to help them deliver some training on the legal definition of consent, especially getting frontline officers to be more aware of the intricacies of consent law, because it's a complicated terrain. So a lot of work is being done, and I think that if our EPS partners were with us today, they would be able to speak more specifically about that.
Well, this has been a terrific conversation. We could probably spend all afternoon and not even hit all your wisdom, ladies, but thank you. First of all, thank you for joining us today. Whether you're a panelist, whether you're online or watching us, we really appreciate. This is such an important conversation in our community. Pre-COVID, but with COVID and moving forward, and I'm going to love that. Let's flatten the curve on sexual violence, because I think we want to move forward to that better normal. And together we can work forward on that. Isn't that wonderful? So I see I'm joined by my colleague, Councillor McKean as well, who joins me on the Gender-Based Violence Initiative. And as I'm wrapping up, do you have a final word of wisdom for us, sir?
Well, thank you. I did get here late, but I've been listening in for about 45 minutes. And I wanted to just say, as a man, how disheartening this is to hear. And we have these almost generational issues around racism, poverty, homelessness, gender-based violence, and sexual violence. But I'm really heartened by what I heard today. And I just wanted to add how fantastic Councillor Bev Esslinger has been as a leader on this issue. And she raises these issues routinely and continuously at council to remind us all of things that we can have blind spots about. So I want to thank you all, and thank you, Bev. And now I'll shut up.
Thank you. Well, if you knew you were going to say that, no, I appreciate that. And I think, it's really about the community working together to make a better city, and a city that's safer for women and girls is safer for everyone. So thank you all for joining me today. And I'm sure if you're online and you're watching this and you need more information, any one of these ladies and Councillor McKean would be happy to talk about this. So thank you once again. Thank you very much. Good day.
Thank you so much, Bev.
Bye-bye.